It's hidden from no one that white mistresses and slave owners would establish sexual relationships with black male slaves. However, this was not enough for them. They wanted more in the form of young blood and muscle. They knew they were quite old, being over 35, to have sexual relationships with white teenage boys. But the desire was simply too much to suppress. That's when white mistresses would think about the black teenage boys who were grinding in slavery. Because white mistresses owned hundreds of slaves and ran slave breeding farms, they would always have eyes on every black boy born there. Surpassing all ethical limits, she would give signs to those boys, seducing and ultimately using them at night. But the sight would never be that simple. It would be full of horror and filth, where white mistresses thought of nothing more than to satisfy themselves by using black teenage boys. So how was this done, and what was the entire site of this activity? Let's know about that in this video.
The Black History Archives.
Desires are never restricted by any ethical principles or laws. White mistresses proved that by going beyond what one can imagine. Even though attention is being paid to forced sexual relationships between white women and black male slaves, details are intentionally hidden. However, it's the details that make things horrific and dirty. Opposite to what is reported, white women would never randomly go and pick any black male slave and spend the night with him. Rather, she would keep an eye on male slaves from the very point they were born, and they ensured they always picked black teenage boys instead of married black male slaves. That's because white women did not want to catch diseases black male slaves would be carrying due to their sexual encounters with black women slaves. However, as for black teenage boys, the white women knew they were virgins and had not been in sexual contact with anyone. But who did they ensure that? Well, that's when we have to go into details. In the pre-Civil War South, a plantation sets the stage, its lush green fields stretching endlessly. On the grand veranda of the plantation house, a white woman of privilege, fair-skinned and commanding, gazes out over the labor of black slaves. Their struggle under the scorching sun stands in stark contrast to her authority. Amidst the rhythmic sounds of hoeing and the rustling of cotton leaves, a whisper spreads among the workers. It's a subdued conversation about a black woman slave in labor. The news swiftly reaches the mistress's ears, sparking a mix of curiosity and entitlement. With each step, her skirts swish softly as she descends from her elevated position. Approaching the slave quarters, anticipation hangs heavy in the air. Inside, the black woman lies on a makeshift bed of straw, enduring the pain of childbirth with resilience. Other slaves gather around, offering silent support. With a blend of fascination and calculation, the mistress observes the midwife's care. Time seems suspended as cries of pain give way to the first cries of new life. In the dimly lit cabin, a baby enters the world covered in the residue of birth. The midwife presents the newborn for inspection, and the mistress's gaze sharpens. The color of the child's skin holds immense significance in her mind. If the baby shares its mother's ebony hue, it faces a life of servitude like generations before. But if by chance the child has fair skin, its fate changes entirely. As the midwife announces the newborn's gender, a black boy, the mistress's expression remains inscrutable, her thoughts veiled in secrecy. Behind her composed demeanor lies a sinister truth. In her mind, she begins to scheme, viewing the infant not as helpless, but as a pawn in her pursuit of power and desire. In the years ahead, she will groom the boy, molding him to her will with gifts and favors while fostering dependence and obedience. When the time is ripe, she will assert her claim over him, using him as a sexual tool for her satisfaction. But one black teenage boy would never be enough. It's because white mistresses love to have various black teenagers they could use at different instances and nights. Not only that, but because there were no ethics involved, white women would use their fantasies and use multiple black teenagers at the same time. However, the major reason behind having multiple black teenage boys under supervision was horrific, which you will know about in a moment. But first, let's know who white mistresses ensured their favorite black boy slaves grew well. White mistresses never wanted their favorite black teenage slaves to work in plantations because this would make them dirty and inferior. Also, they would not be able to get sufficient food this way. Therefore, white mistresses would make the black teenagers their home servants. In this way, they remained closer to her and got sufficient food. She would also observe black teenage characters, trying to analyze whether they can become a resistance against slavery once they are grown-ups. She would only pick the most submissive ones whom she could use easily without being exposed to the white community that she was a woman who had sexual relationships with black slaves. At that time, the black teenage slaves would not understand why they were being treated this way. Even though such a treatment was not much better than what other slaves were facing, it was different. From the age of 5 to 15, the black boy slaves would work in the white mistresses' homes. White mistresses would wait until they were above 15 so that the black teenagers would be sexually active and could deeply satisfy them. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community, and we need your support. Let's continue now. The interactions between white mistresses and their chosen black teenage male slaves were intricate, revealing the complex power dynamics at play. While these slaves may have found some solace and protection within the mistress's residence, they were still subject to the harsh realities of plantation life. Contrary to the notion that slaves living in the mistress's quarters were exempt from the grueling labor of the plantation, the reality often diverged. White mistresses tasked these black teenage slaves to work in plantations. This was done deliberately so black teenage slaves could grow physically. Only then would they be able to satisfy their white mistresses. However, it served a double purpose. Even though physical labor was better for sexuality, it eventually increased production and economic gain. Physical strength held immense value in the antebellum South, where agriculture formed the backbone of the economy. Slave owners recognized the necessity of cultivating robust, enduring workers capable of enduring the demanding conditions of plantation work. Thus, they implemented measures to bolster the physical development of their slaves, even those privileged enough to reside in the mistress's household. Moreover, the promotion of physical strength often aimed to stimulate hormonal activity in these young slaves. Hormonal changes during adolescence were seen as essential for their overall development, both physically and emotionally. By assigning them duties on the plantation, white mistresses aimed to provoke the production of hormones that would aid in their growth and maturation into sturdy, capable workers. But the hidden reason was to develop black teenage slaves sexually so white mistresses could satisfy her desires. Once the black teenage boys were fully physically developed, they would be confronted with what they were prepared for, and that was to have sexual relationships with white mistresses. Usually, they would be between 15 and 18 years of age, being extremely active and attractive due to their robust physical body. White mistresses could never resist that, and ultimately, the chapter of sexual encounters began. White mistresses would use the authority they had to order black teenage male slaves to establish sexual relationships. However, they were resisted by black teenage slaves. That's when they were blackmailed. They were told that if they did not follow, they will be accused of rape, which will get them killed. Ultimately, the black teenage slaves would submit. White mistress would then call her favorite black teenage slave during the night and engage in sexual encounters. However, these sexual encounters were never simple. Because white mistresses had made so much effort for these moments, they were never satisfied with one encounter. Therefore, black teenage slaves were made to engage in sexual activities with the white mistress the entire night. she would satisfy her desires in a way she could only think of in her dreams. While married, she could never be satisfied the way she wanted, but now she had the chance. Instead of letting the black teenage boy go after one encounter, she would order him to do it again and again. The black teenage boy would get tired, but the white mistress would be simply too thirsty. After spending the entire night, she would finally allow the black teenage boy to leave in the morning. But things did not stop there. Because the white mistress had multiple black teenage boys under her power, she would often call them together. Usually taking place in the basement of her home, the sexual activity would get unethical when she would order all the black boys to satisfy her at the same time. However, in most cases, the multiple black teenagers were used as a gift given to the white women who did not own slaves. In other words, white mistresses who owned slaves enjoyed powers. However, those who did not own slaves were under the subjugation of their husbands, and thinking about establishing sexual relationships with slaves was nearly impossible for them. Therefore, they would make friends with white mistresses and ask them to let them enjoy themselves with the black teenage boys. Arrangements were made where the white mistress would call the non-slave-owning women during the night. Then, black teenage boys would be called, and white women would enjoy the night. However, the white mistress would ensure the top favorite among the black teenagers stays to herself. That's because she didn't want him to be in anyone's sexual encounter. That was not for his safety, but for her own, because she had plans to use him for years. Do you think that the sexual relationships between white women and black teenagers continue to this day, although the dynamic is different? Isn't it true that this part of black history is intentionally censored to avoid guilt by white supremacists? Share this video and give it a like so the YouTube algorithm can push it to a wider audience. Would you like us to make more videos? If yes, please support us by subscribing to the Black History Archives and clicking the bell icon so we can make more videos.